Your time and insights.
Thank you.
Well, the legend of the light horse is one of the greatest of Australia's involvement in the First World War. The soldier stories are well known, but far less so, of course, are the horses that they rode to the front line. Now, many of them were called Walers. These are tough working horses from New South Wales that could withstand the, at times, unforgiving conditions of the Middle East. Now, in the New South Wales Upper Hunter today, a stud still breeds direct descendants of the horses that served Australia nearly a century ago.
Spring on Peter Hayden's horse stud is a busy time of the year. It's foaling season, and this 3-week-old is getting used to his legs. He's the latest addition to a horse breeding operation that dates back to the early 1830s, when Mr. Hayden's great-great-grandfather first set up this farm, half an hour from Scone in rural New South Wales.
We're very fortunate. Not many people do have the generations of horses that go back, and in some cases we have 10 or 12 generations of the mare lines that we do have here now.
Here they started breeding Walers, a mixed breed of horse that took its name from the former colony of New South Wales. 80 years later, the stud would play its role in one of Australia's defining periods when it sent Walers, sired by a stallion called Tester, to the other side of the world and the First World War.
So you've got these two horses, you know, and they've got that link back to World War I right here in this shed.
Yeah, all the ones in the stable here today, yeah, they'd all go back to Tester mares, yeah.
Those Walers were among more than 130,000 horses that served in the war, and they were well placed to endure the hot and dry conditions of the Middle Eastern desert.
Well, Walers were bred here under very natural conditions. I think the conditions in Australia are a little bit hotter and drier than the contemporary horses that were bred and brought to the First World War from, say, Europe and England, a much softer climate.
The role of the light horse was really initially scouting and then dismounting to fight. They rode to where they were going to fight, then got off and fought.
Jane Peake says it was the famous charge of Beersheba on October 31st, 1917 that changed the role of the Walers to that of a full-fledged cavalry horse. It was a crucial fight for the Allied forces as they were running low on water and had to capture the wells in the city to stop the Turks poisoning them.
2 regiments from the 4th Light Horse Brigade were sent to take the wells, and it developed into a galloped charge, which was quite unusual for the light horse. And the men overran the Turks in the waiting trenches, and it was all over quite quickly, but the wells were saved in time to get the water.
Peter Hayden's great-uncles, Guy and Barney Hayden, rode in the charge on horses from the Upper Hunter stud. Guy Hayden recounted the intensity of the mission in a letter to his family back home.
We could hardly hear anything for the noise of their rifles and machine guns. As soon as their fire started, we galloped, and you never heard such an awful yell as our boys let out. They never hesitated or faltered for a moment. It was grand. Every now and again a rider would roll off or a horse fall short, but the line swept on. As we neared their trenches, our men were falling thicker and thick, and the pace became faster.
After Beersheba, they started to introduce swords into the light horse regiments, and by the end of the war, half of the regiments had swords, like a true cavalryman.
Like the thousands of horses who died in the war, Guy Hayden's mount Midnight didn't make it past the charge. But the horse saved Guy's life, and he was able to return to the farm to continue the family business. And today, Midnight's lineage lives on at the Bloomfield homestead.
Well, modern-day Walers like these are today still being sent overseas, but it's for a different purpose. Peter Hayden sells them to international clients to be used in some of the top polo competitions in England, America, Argentina and Spain.
It's a far cry from the harsh and dangerous conditions the Walers endured nearly 100 years ago. But it's something Peter Hayden appreciates as he works to keep their Anzac legacy alive.
From my point of view, that's a very big responsibility to make sure that we can keep the stallions up to those mares and that we can hopefully breed them on for the future for the next generation.
So they too can learn about the sacrifice of the war horse.
Jackson Vernon there in a beautiful part of Australia, the Upper Hunter Valley of New South Wales. Let's cross the continent back to Albany, yet another beautiful part of this country. Albany has been a critical part of Australia's maritime defence since well before